So this lecture is from chapter 14, and it is on defining stress. I think before we can cope with stress, we definitely have to define it. So let's look at a quote though first that I really like. The greatest weapon against stress is our ability to choose one thought over another. I think our thoughts and what we automatically think are really often what leads us to feeling stressed. So we have to have that ability to choose one thought over another. Again, how do we define stress? It is the physiological or psychological response to internal or external stressors. And the next PowerPoint, we'll look at what some various stressors are, so be sure and check that out also. Stress involves changes affecting nearly every system of the body, influencing how people feel and behave. So the way we appraise what is stressful, there's primary versus secondary stress. So if you look at the diagram above, we have a stimulus event, something that could cause stress. The situation is perceived as threatening. So that at that point, we're going to go to coping resources, appear inadequate or likely to be taxed. So the situation appears threatening, and then we think, I'm not adequate enough to handle this situation. So that's what produces stress. Now, on the other hand, if the situation again is perceived as threatening, but we have the coping resources to deal with it, then we're not going to experience stress. And obviously, if the situation is perceived as harmless, we're not going to experience stress. So I think the main idea behind this is if we have an experience that we perceive as threatening, and we don't feel like we have the resources to cope with that threatening experience, that's where stress comes from. So is there good stress? Thankfully, yes, there is. Stress can motivate us to do things in our best interests, such as study for exams, visit the doctor regularly, exercise, and perform to the best of our ability at work. Stress can sometimes be a positive motivating force that can improve the quality of our lives. And this positive stress is called eustress. But there's a however. However, when stress exceeds a certain level, it becomes distress. So let's look at further comparison of eustress versus distress. Again, eustress can motivate you. It's usually short term, it doesn't last very long. We're able to cope with it, as we mentioned coping earlier. It feels exciting and it improves their performance. However, distress for sure induces anxiety. We're not able to cope with it. It actually decreases our performance and it can cause lots of mental and physical problems. So I think the idea is that stress to a certain extent can be positive, it can be motivating, but once it gets past a certain level, it goes the opposite direction and it can really create anxiety and decrease their performance. Probably most of you have heard of the fight or flight response, but let's define it here. It's a group of changes that occur in the body to help a person fight or take flight in stressful or dangerous situations. This is the body's way of helping to protect itself from possible harm. During fight or flight, certain hormones, such as adrenaline and cortisol, are released into the blood. This causes an increase in blood pressure, heart rate, and breathing. Other changes include an increase in blood sugar, alertness, muscle tension, and sweating. So I think that's evidence that stress really does have a physical effect on our body. Probably more than we realize it affects us physically. Let's also look at the general adaptation syndrome. The general adaptation syndrome describes the three-stage response your body goes through when under stress. There's an alarm reaction, and that's called the fight or flight, what we do initially. Resistance, where our body recovers from the stress. And exhaustion, after we've dealt with the stress. Most of you know that we experience a lot of fatigue and burnout because it's just hard on us to deal with mentally and physically. The video I tried to include below does a really good job of describing these three stages. However, I know you're unable to click on it within this context, so I will be sure and upload it to one of the announcements for this week. So it's a pretty short lecture, but it's a basic view on what stress is, how we define stress. The next two lectures for this chapter will be on looking at various stressors, so things that stress us out, and also how to adapt to stress, which is probably the most important thing to know. But if you have questions about this, please let me know.